all be cognizant of time. And I will start with Kirk.
I don't have anything to say. I'll turn it over to Kate. Make it short.
Well, next is Tim.
Tim or Kate, whoever.
I don't think I was next in line, that's okay. I'd almost kind of like to wait to the end to hear what everybody else has to say if there's a problem with that, and if not, I can, because I think I'll be answering some questions that you might have, especially for new House resolution and things like that. So if that's okay, can I go at the end?
Tim or Kate?
That's correct.
We just keep passing.
That's correct. I learned a long time ago to defer everything to Kate.
Oh.
Okay.
Hi. Well, thanks for allowing us to continue this discussion. As you know, we were here in late June with an initial proposal to at least consider this implementation of the $15 recording fee on each unit mortgage in the county for the purpose of demolition blight. As a result of that meeting, we set up a small work group to discuss the potential for that fee, but then also other ways that we can combat blight in the county. And so we also want to put together a blight inventory, do some additional due diligence, and answer some questions that you as the board had for us at that meeting. And so we conducted a survey of all the municipalities in the county, and we aimed to answer the following questions that are outlined in your memo there. Whether the municipality had adopted the IPMC or another property maintenance code. Did the municipality have code enforcement staff? Were they part-time, were they full-time, were they staff of the municipality, or were they a third-party entity? Does the municipality have a rental registration and or a rental inspection ordinance? What is the municipality's ability to contribute funds to a demolition project? And what are the top 3 priority properties in the municipality that could be demolished? And we had given some basic guidance on what constituted blight and what would be eligible based on the Senate bill and Act 152. And at the back of your packet there is the conservatorship statute, which is actually what defines blight, that the properties could be demolished using this fund. And so I've given each of you the results of that survey and the blight inventory that we put together added to since our last meeting. We had 23 respondents of the 33 municipalities in the county. Of those 23, 12 have adopted the IPMC or some version of property maintenance code. And this includes certain nuisance ordinances as well. 10 have indicated, and I think that's, 10 indicated they had a rental registration or inspection ordinance. 12 municipalities identified priority properties that could be demolished utilizing funds collected through this fee that met that definition of blight in the conservatorship statute. And then, as we expected, very few municipalities indicated that they would be able to contribute funds, it wasn't in their budget, to contribute funds to demolition of blighted properties in the community, which to us further emphasized the need for the resources available for this use. And so we reconvened a few weeks ago to discuss the results of the survey. And what we wanted to propose to you after that meeting is to implement the fee in a pilot basis. And so collect the fee for 2 to 3 years, have the funds go into a pot, and then at the end of that 2 or 3 year period, the Board of Commissioners could either decide to extend the collection period or put a stop to it. And as we had discussed at our last meeting, we think that this could effectively be worked through the Blighted Properties Reinvestment Board. And something that we as an authority in staffing that board have had success with in the past is taking possession of a property through the Conservatorship Act, where we petition the court for conservatorship, go in, take possession of the property, remove the conditions of blight, whether it's demolition, rehab, in our case it would be demolition. And then we can put a conservator's lien on that property. So any funds spent out of the fund on the demolition of that property would be liened against the property, and then we as the authority, as the conservator, would go in, sell the property. It has to go through a public sale process, an RFP process. And then at the sale, that lien is paid. And so those funds would revolve back into the fund, which, you know, we can set up that 2 to 3 year collection period, build up a fund, and then we've worked it so that we can, it revolves itself and it self-replenishes. We discussed priorities that we would give to properties that would request use of the funds, including those that have been certified blighted by the board and the respective planning commissions. board, just meaning that wider preference for the investment board. And then also properties that are located in communities that have adopted the IPC. So rewarding communities that are taking steps on their own to combat blight and step up their code enforcement efforts. We also talked about having the redevelopment authority and the municipality involved during the sale process. So obviously we would be issuing that RFP. And so we want to make sure that anything that's going to be the end use of that property, we can make sure that it's in the highest and best use of the community. Some of the things, I'm sorry?
Who decides that?
I think we had talked about the appraisal process. I think that's still something that we can work through. But we talked about appraisal, highest and best use, working with, again, the board, the municipality, the planning commissions, and those communities. Obviously, we have a public input process. All of the blight boards, planning commissions are open to the public, and our board obviously would award that RFP in a public process, so we can have public hearings and generate some public input on that. Some of the considerations for end use that we've discussed were return to non-tax exempt residential or commercial, conveyance to a public school, other public purpose, or conveyance directly to the municipality, purely public space, and then we've also discussed tax exempt affordable housing as a consideration. We've talked before about how the availability of these funds can also incentivize municipalities to step up their code enforcement efforts. I think we shared with you at the end of June that we see very few properties come through the blight board because there's no resource at the end. There's a lot of work that goes into certifying a property as blighted, and then at the end of that process, there's no resource available to help remediate the blighting influences. And so having that available at the end, we believe can encourage municipalities to step up their code enforcement efforts. There's other things in the legislation that call for certain reporting, which we expect that our staff would handle as well through the blight board. This includes regular reporting to the blight board, to the board of commissioners, as well as DCED, which is required by legislation. And I know, Tammy, you had expressed some concerns early on about the burden to the county, and so I think that the burden directly on county staff would be minimal and would be limited to that collection of the fee and the monitoring and reporting to us on the financial end of things. And I think that would probably be the extent of it, which is very similar to the way the Affordable Housing Council is operated.
That person still need to be paid, and that's not, it can't be paid from this amount of this money. So the county would have to come up with however that's going to be funded outside of the money that my office is collecting.
Right. And in the interest of time, we know that this is not the end-all solution to fighting blight. We know that there are ways to incentivize the private development to combat blight in downtown's core communities for more industrial sites. We've talked about LERTA, and we know that some properties can be rehabilitated and don't require demolition. And we as a work group talked about those things and talked about our commitment to continuing discussions on how to incentivize private development, so other tools to combat blight, as well as other tools to help municipalities step up their code enforcement efforts if it's the time and capacity constraints on their end, and how can we, as a county, help help them manage that. And we also know that properties won't be taken care of by the private sector. Very few make it to the tax sale for purchased by private developers. We know that code enforcement efforts can fall on deaf ears of property owners, particularly, again, in communities that have limited capacity to administer those codes. And we know that rehabilitation can be cost prohibitive. A really good example of that, I'm sure you're all tired of hearing Tim and me talk about 203 East Main Street and Mechanicsburg, the fire damage property that it would have just been hundreds of thousands of dollars to rehabilitate and get that to new use. And so those parcels, we really believe that the adoption of this can and will be a successful tool in fighting just a small component of blight. Tim and I just had this conversation. We know it's not the end-all solution, but we definitely think it's something that's necessary in the community and the county. So with that, I honor questions or pass it on to Jonathan or anybody else who would want to.
We have a listing here of blighted properties inventory. Your inventory, the county's inventory.
This is the inventory. As part of the survey, we asked communities to provide landed properties in their community. And so this is what the municipalities themselves have provided to us.
But not all municipalities have not.
Not all municipalities responded, correct. So I know that there are others throughout the county that we can identify.
Any questions for Kate?
I have a question, I guess, maybe more for John than anything. I gotta tell you, I'm disappointed in this because I thought we were gonna take a more holistic look to the idea from a redevelopment perspective and not simply continue to focus in on how to get this blight tax passed. But that sure looks like exactly what we have. Was there any effort made to identify? We have a county that has very robust economic underpinnings. You got developers who want to develop parcels. You have a shortage of parcels that are developable. And you even have developers who specifically want to do redevelopment of existing properties. That is a perfect recipe for addressing most blight issues. So my approach to this would have been to identify what are the obstacles that are in the way of unleashing those existing and substantial private market forces that will solve this issue without substantial public investment or substantial government overreach. And I don't think we've scratched the surface on that. Granted, I haven't had time to read this all.
Right.
So John, I want to ask you if you can identify what are those factors that are getting in the way of the natural solutions to this dearth of redevelopment when we have all these other circumstances that would seem to favor redevelopment.
I would say a big piece of it is probably lack of planning. You know, some of these sites, I think on the front end, you know, codes enforcement and some of those things. But you know, once that's already happening, you have a vacant site. I think a lot of times it's lack of planning for community vision. I mean, we're living it now in Lemoyne as we speak. But you look here in Carlisle, I think when those plants closed, there was good planning by the local municipality as to the vision of those sites and the redevelopment of those sites. And so I think from my viewpoint and from the viewpoint of others who we deal with who are in that space, it really is no real planning at the local level of how to repurpose those sites. Is the zoning adequate? Parking requirements, other ordinances that would then allow for a site to be redeveloped.
Let me stop you there because I think maybe we're talking two different directions here. And I can hear Lemoyne redevelopment in everything you're saying, and I want to kind of take you out of that element because my focus on this is, and redirect me if I'm wrong, but most of our blight is in residential communities.
That's correct.
Okay, so a lot of those issues that would be directly applicable to the Lemoyne middle school redevelopment would be very either non-existent or in very different proportions in regards to the type of existing blight that we're discussing here. So the planning element, if it's resident, I'm looking at this, at least for the moment, on the assumption that a residential community predominantly wants to remain residential. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about a zoning change. We're not talking about parking requirements. We got a property here that's derelict. We have an owner that's negligent in maintaining code. So how do we address that? So if there are obstacles to somebody else coming in privately, in this case, and making highest and best use of that property, what are those obstacles, and are there ways that we can ameliorate those directly or indirectly to, as I say, unleash the forces of all these folks out here who would jump at the opportunity to profitably redevelop that? What's getting in the way of them as we ready to Is it regulatory? Is it purely a profitability question? Why does residential blight exist?
Well, usually when you have, to that point, I think some of it is also, trying to get the financing to be able to acquire a site from that perspective. If you demolition is a negative cost. And so if you're buying a property at fair market value, and you have to demolish that site, the demolition costs it's a negative cost. I mean, it's costs that you have to eat, but there's no value in that. And so I think that this tax could help offset situations and scenarios where you have a property that, it's only going to capture so much value, but you can't sink $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 into demolition because of just the economics of the project just don't work. You cannot get the financing you need.
So it's largely a profitability question. So you're not going to attract the developer to because of the profitability.
If the home is only worth $50,000, it's going to cost you $30,000 to demo it. Now you're upside down on a property, and so it just doesn't make sense to a developer. So to me, this fee kind of incentivizes that developer to say, okay, now I can pay for fair market value, whatever that may be,
right.
And I can still make a profit, and I can still rent it out at a decent amount to be able to get the profit that I'm looking for. So I think that's it.
One of the things, and I'll wait for Gary to finish and I'll ask my question, but one of the things I think was important, you made reference to the redevelopment here in Carlisle. That would not have happened without public finance.
Yeah.
That would not have happened without public finance. And the property that we continue to talk about on Main Street in Mechanicsburg could have been addressed a long time ago, had there been this, this fund in existence. And that wasn't a property that the private sector was willing to come in and assume all the costs associated with that in terms of the demolition, right? I mean, there was nobody knocking on the door saying, yeah, we want to tear this down. We want to take care of that burned up vehicle there. We want to take care of all the issues associated with the property in Main Street.
So when a house burns down, how does it get rebuilt?
Typically, the municipality has 6 months to remedy that situation. We had a situation about...
No, I'm talking about just in general. Someone has a house fire, their home is virtually destroyed.
Yeah, but my understanding is there was no insurance. The lady had abandoned the house, right?
The lady was dead.
Or she
She
passed.
there was
She
no
was deceased.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't,
So there wasn't any insurance.
That's
There
right.
was no fire insurance on it.
right, there was no estate.
Okay, now we're getting to my question, which is what are the obstacles?
So I think one of the other things too, and this is correct for a lot of the properties that we see that come through the planning board, is the liens on the property. So private developers aren't necessarily willing to come in and buy a property that goes to the tax sale with all those liens. The other thing that we see a lot of is we have absentee owners, but somebody continues to pay the tax on them. So there's no way to contact the owner, but they're continuing to pay their property tax, so it just sits there. And there's no...
Or at least enough of the tax to keep it from sheriffs.
That's right.
I think it gets back here, the point you were making too. If you have derelict property owners that aren't here, the property's fallen into disrepair, you can't buy something that's not for sale. And so you have some of these properties that are sitting out there, they may be paying just enough taxes to keep it out of sheriff's sale, so it sits there forever and a day, and nothing happens to it.
Okay, does blight, how close does blight come to allowing you to condemn a property?
Through the Blighted Properties Reinvestment Board program, there's a definition of blight, and whatever you meet in that program, one of those conditions, then you can go in through this program and condemn the properties. Like Kate said, the issue's been that municipalities are unwilling to come forward to move through that process because they know at the end there's no remedy. If we were to pursue this fee, when you get to the end, then you know there's something at the end where the property could be demolished. So if it's a derelict landowner, great. We could condemn the property, we demolish the property, it makes it a lot more attractive than you have a shovel-ready site for a developer to come in and redevelop the property. So I think that's, to me, through my Blighted Properties days of running that program, that was the biggest holdup. You have these guys that aren't responding to anything. They don't respond to codes enforcement. They didn't respond to threats of condemnation because I think they knew they weren't serious. if we put something on the other end that carrot and incentive for the municipalities to move forward, the redevelopment authority to move forward, hopefully they'll respond. If they don't respond, we can go through a process to take the property and then remove the blight and then hopefully put it back on the market. And
So is it a matter that the municipalities don't have existing tools or they won't use existing tools?
I think we looked at the survey too. If we have nearly half the municipalities that respond, if they have the IPMC, the International Property Maintenance Code, they have tools to work. Those tools are only effective as the property owner responds. If they're not paying fines or not responding to them,
That's right. That's exactly.
there's nothing really you can do. I mean, they're doing all they can do, so this is a program of last resort.
If I may, blight relates to the exterior, condemnation relates more to the interior, and you need cause to get inside. Let me tell you, my experience is if the outside is bad, the inside ain't so hot either. And we see that time and time again. You may have seen the article in Saturday's Sentinel, in South Middleton Township, the garage that they want to rid, and that was the third article I've seen about the garage. And talking with the township manager there, the house is bad as well, and they keep citing it, and the owner does enough to keep them off their backs, and just enough to keep them off their backs. But there's no, the home is not inhabited and hasn't been for years and years. There it sits, not getting any better, but they trim the weeds whenever they get cited, and they remove whatever debris is piling up whenever they're cited.
So they're bringing it back up to code.
They haven't. They haven't in the past. They just, last week they brought that before the Lake Board. And so they issued citation
The
after
garage.
citation. The garage, right.
I'm not familiar with the specific. Okay.
Jimmy,
For now, yeah.
okay, for Jimmy.
I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Okay, Jonathan, you're next on the list. You wanna?
I'm appointed too, I don't really have anything extra to add.
I think I would agree with Gary about this whole issue of what are the obstacles, and one of those big obstacles, and we've seen it, the poster child of this is 203 East Main Street. Many of these properties, as you notice, are, first off, you're right, they're residential. They're often in older neighborhoods. These are often townhomes, row houses, types of situations, which then mean you can't just go in there with a backhoe, tear the thing down, and cart it away. It means a whole lot of handwork. So just in the case of 203 East Main Street, the demolition costs on that exceed $100,000. We're still working with the potential contractor on that to finalize the pricing on that. You also have in many of these older properties asbestos there, so you have other types of environmental hazards that you're dealing with because these are older properties. And as Jonathan said, all those things do is start accelerating the cost, but then move it beyond what a private developer is going to say, oh yeah, I can invest $200,000, $100,000, even $50,000 in a property when all is said and done. It's going to come onto the value of maybe $30,000, $40,000. So it's the economics that really create headaches on this. And municipalities don't have the resources. We don't have the resources as the redevelopment authority, except coming to you all and saying, let's use CDBG funds, which, as you know, have been under a lot of pressure of late. So when you add all that together, it's like, how can you deal with these things? And like for 203 East Main Street, again, that's been, what, more than a decade that has been an eyesore in downtown Mechanicsburg. Something like this would have helped spur some of those efforts along to be in a position to respond to it a little bit more quickly.
If I may too, to jump back to Commissioner Eichelberger's point, as the redevelopment authority, it's exactly what we want to see. We don't want demolition. We want to work with developers and others, new buyers, new owners, to recreate, redesign, rethink, repurpose buildings. And in the downtowns, we have a lot of mixed-use buildings or homes that can be converted to commercial inventory, which is what we want in the downtown. We want that commercial. And we've seen many examples of that here in Carlisle and in Mechanicsburg in particular. So they're not on the list, but they're not on the list because we've been proactive before they get so bad, or even after they're condemned and turning them around. We have examples on Hanover, we have examples on High, we have examples on Main Street in Mechanicsburg that are now mixed-use properties with really nice, high-end or above market rate apartments here in Carlisle and in Mechanicsburg, and that have brand-new businesses that made their start in formerly condemned buildings, working with developers to turn them around. So it has to be both. You're absolutely right. So we're doing both. This would help those municipalities, and you're right, they have to be responsible too. They have to step up their enforcement. They need to adopt the IPMC. They need to have rental inspection programs in place. I just found another municipality this week that's working on rental inspection ordinance. We have one that will adopt one in December, and a new borough that will adopt that in December. But all along, up until now, they've had, they could send them a letter and then a little slightly meaner letter. They're not really mean. They're not mean at all. And then a third letter. That's all they can do. There's nothing.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to that. I've been a township commissioner in East Pennsboro for 22 years. Okay, and we have a staff that's responsible for enforcement. Okay, we were one of the first municipalities to implement the rental inspection. Okay. But what I remember, and you talk to John Owens over there, you have certain problem properties. You can fine them, you can lien them, and you don't get any answer. And you can, essentially, it's like knocking your head against a brick wall. So sooner or later, the property's abandoned, and there's all these liens on it. And it needs to be torn down, but nobody's got any money to do it. I mean, we have some properties right there in West Fairview, right along the road, that essentially people have walked away from, and they're sitting there. Now, in fact, I remember we've had some properties in East Pennsboro, and what we've done is when somebody doesn't pay their mortgage and they get foreclosed upon, then the bank owns, but it's kind of like difficult sometimes to get the bank to take responsibility for the property that they own. We've actually, in East Pennsboro Township, we've actually gone in and mowed the yard, have the township crews mow their property and then build the bank, or that it gets ended up, was added to the lien that somebody's going to have to pay off. So some of these properties are tough nuts to crack. And the problem is why I'm open to considering this. Not that this is ideal, but I think that we do have those situations, because once you have blight established, in just a small area, it can very easily spread like the dickens, which means lower property values for everybody around the area. So, in any event, that was one thing. I did want to ask a question relative to Kate, and you mentioned here about this conservatorship. Isn't that the idea of then leading a property to the cost of demolition? Doesn't that make it even more difficult then for the private sector to come in and pick up? I mean, why would we want to necessarily, because we have this fee, and you're going to want to replenish the fund, but doesn't that make it, if you're going to place a lien on the property, I mean, isn't that the cost that's preventing a private developer from taking it on to begin with?
In certain instances, yes. In our experience, and we've only done a few, it is not. Now, if we go and have a property that's already has hundreds of thousands of dollars in liens, this may not be the best solution for that, because you're right, it's only going to add another lien. But in a lot of cases, it's a property where there isn't a lien in place, and so this would be the only lien that's there. And so a developer could come in and buy a vacant lot for $20,000, or whatever, I'm pulling that number out of the air, whatever that conservator's would want to be. instead of going to the tax sale and having to bid and having to pay all those liens.
Because the lot might be 120,000 counting the lien to tear the property down.
Depending on the size of the lien.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, I'm just raising the question, I don't know why we would, you know, if the bar, you know, that they're trying to reach here is to encourage private sector to come in and develop a property, you know, I would think that would stand in the way, you know, if all of a sudden now we're going to charge back the cost of the demolition. In other words, why didn't they just come in and pay the amount to demolish it or purchase the property and then pay the, you know, I don't know.
It could. I think in our discussions, we felt that was a way, again, to your point, to make it replenish itself.
Mhm.
So if we find that it would continue, if it would be a barrier, I think we would revisit that.
But who's leveling the majority of the liens? General taxing bodies, aren't they?
Correct.
Okay, so the real cost is to the taxing bodies. Most of the liens are unpaid taxes. Very few of them are probably bank mortgages because the bank will assume ownership and presumably eventually sell the property.
Correct.
So that gets it off their books, but, so have municipalities that are generally concerned about this, what about lien forgiveness?
We've talked to Mechanicsburg about that.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that we did consider with them on 203 East Main Street. So I think that would be something that we would definitely.
That could be the matching funds, Gary. You know, when you
Right.
look through
Yep.
the survey, a lot of people didn't have any money on hand, but if they have liens on the property, to forgive those liens could serve as the match to the money that we would put in.
So you think you would still need both?
Potentially. I mean, we have a list of properties. I mean, I don't think we've gone into the detail to look at each one to figure out the financials on it yet. I mean,
Was there any intent to discuss, and I know this wasn't to be a totally thorough process, but have we actually surveyed private developers on what they see as the obstacles? Are the liens, I think we're making a lot of assumptions here.
Yeah, as part of this process, no, but I think it's absolutely something that we would be willing to do.
I mean, there's a number of, well, one guy in particular, Dan Deichman, used to redevelop here in town, in Carlisle, trying to redevelop. He had his issues for discontinuing that practice, and I won't go into those, but I mean, there's an individual who I think would be really worth talking to and saying, okay, what would prevent you from coming in and doing more properties? And what would prevent you, Dan, from coming in to a 203 East Main and redeveloping? And I would put a lot of weight on something that's coming out of the developers themselves telling me what their obstacles are. Because I want to attack those obstacles. I don't want to just put another program in place that we think is going to solve this. Because I tell you, you also run a risk here that if now relying on this money as the means of paying for demolition to reduce the development risk, there is the potential here that everybody's going to hold out for the public money instead of taking on risk that they absolutely could assume. So now you've got a big demand for, you've created a situation where you're going to create your own demand.
I think,
And I don't think that's really that's not the solution.
I think some of these properties, you know, when you talk about someone like Dan, I mean, some of it is the red tape that surrounds some of these older properties. But some of it still does go back, especially if you're talking in some of your core downtowns, and I know he invested a lot, you know, heading north of here on Hanover. A lot of it does go back to, you know, zoning as well. And even in West Fairview, I mean, we've talked to a lot of developers about, you know, redeveloping some of those old row homes down in that area. But when you look at the, you know, the floodplain map, and you look at other barriers, it's really more of a mixed use kind of area. So I still think, you know, the zoning, and I think some of these other red tape items such as the tax things, as Jim just brought up, or, I mean, those are some of the key. If you can clear a path for a developer to see, you know, I have a path to financially make this a worthwhile investment.
Again, this is,
what we want
I think that's exactly what I was asking for when we had this first discussion in June, which is bring us a game plan to address this from a broad palette perspective. And if that means zoning changes, then we've got municipal partners here who stand to benefit from actually making changes they can make. If it's a matter of lien forgiveness, then why aren't we actively proposing that as a means of addressing this issue? It seems like we should be looking at this from here's the problem, here are the drivers of the problem, what are the pedals of influence we can exercise to address those, instead of going straight to the idea that, okay, we need a bigger involvement and another fee, another tax, whatever you want to call it, and another level of involvement by your county government or a governing body. So, and I'm not saying that we don't have a legitimate role in this potentially, but I would like to know what all of those things are, and then determine whether the government role needs to be the predominant role, or any role at all, for that matter. And I guess I'm a little disappointed we haven't looked at this apparently from that broader perspective that I thought we were discussing in June.
If I could add, you brought up the considerations. We use that word a lot at the authority because there's so many variables as opposed to criteria, which just sounds sticky. Because there are so many variables, so many factors. Using 203 East Main as an example, and I think it's really the exception. It's very unique property in so many ways. That lot is 30 feet by 150 deep. With setbacks, if you were to build there, that would be 20 foot by 140 maximum. Well, it could be 140 because you have to allow for parking and you have to allow for so much green space. So that would be an itty bitty house, not much bigger than the tavern that's next door. And most of these are residential. And that, I think, really should be the focus. We're really not talking about large properties here. We're not talking about, those are the exceptions to the rule here. So that kind of skews, I think ought to skew the discussion.
I would agree with you that 203 East Main is an exceptionally difficult circumstance, and that is one of the reasons I'm troubled. We keep citing it as the reason we have to make this broad-based change based on what we encountered in one case.
It is not the reason. But it's not unlike, there are many row homes on the list of Carlisle here, and they're not as wide as 30 feet. So what a developer could do with a 25-foot space that's 100 foot deep isn't a whole lot. So it's not likely that a developer is going to go in there. It's more likely that we can rework that space as a single family home.
Well, this is about the demolition aspect of it. So my question is, why does the municipality not have responsibility? These cases are exceptional, by the way. We only had one in the 14 years I was on council in Cumberland that I can recall. And in those cases, the municipality was really on the front line of trying to protect the value of their space.
And there was a big safety concern with that one. You wanted York and Simpson, that one?
No, I was talking about, it was a residential property back on,
Locust.
yeah, it's back on the other side. I can't remember, it's too long ago. Which one are you referring to?
York and Simpson, the traffic signal, took that down, the trucks kept clipping
Yeah.
the house.
Yeah, in fact, that was, I forgot about that one. Yeah, that was very different circumstance.
Far too.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull stuff out of my brain for a long time ago, so. Anyhow, so I think I made my point. I don't think I had a question.
Lauren, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I just have a couple things. The association is, of course, strongly opposed to any additional fees or taxes on the closing costs for a home. We view this as yet another tax on homeowners. I would like to respectfully disagree with Rebecca. I do not think, the association does not think rental inspection ordinances are the way to go. Not all municipalities need that, very few municipalities need that. What they need, quite frankly, is to adopt the IPMC and enforce it. Every municipality that we have gone into in the 4 years I've been at GHAR, where we have talked to people, they either don't have codes relating to this, or they're not enforcing them. And that's why weeds are getting to be 6 feet tall and back porches are falling off and stairs are falling down. Furthermore, one of our strong objections to rental inspection ordinances is they only target rental properties. If you're seriously concerned about blight and concerned about the health and safety, then adopt something that applies to everyone. There are just as many owner-occupied structures in this county that are on the cusp of being blighted as there are rental-occupied ones. It's not only landlords. I live in York County, so I can't, the examples I can cite aren't here, but I can cite, properties in my own neighborhood that are owner-occupied. We have worked, we worked with the Borough of Lemoyne for 18 months. We're working with the Borough of Mount Holly Springs on their rental inspection ordinance. So are we going to fight this? No, not necessarily, but we tend to agree with Gary that, you're taking almost a scorched earth approach for a couple of really bad examples when there are tools in toolboxes that people either aren't using or haven't picked up, and we'd like to see that be the first line of defense. My other comment would be with regards to what Rebecca was saying about demolishing properties and with the new setback requirements. Take a holistic approach to looking at what that is. If you're demolishing a row home, does it make sense for that row home to have to adhere to the setback requirements? Or should you, in the term of appraisers, look at the characteristics of the neighborhood and say, okay, you know what? With the rest of our new construction, we require 10-foot setbacks on the side and 5-foot setbacks on the front and back, but this is a row home, so we're gonna waive that to build another row home in here to fit with the character of the neighborhood and to be the highest and best use of the property.
But to your point, that goes to planning.
Sure.
So if you're a developer and you're looking at a site like that and you have to go to the local council or planning commission or whoever you have to go through, there's fees that come associated with trying to get those waivers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, now the economics of the project don't work.
And Kirk and I just talked about that on.
And so, when you talk about why people are deterred, if they know they have to go and come to Carlisle Borough Council to get a waiver, now they have to hire an engineer and an attorney.
And they probably have to come more than once.
And they have to come more than once because they're not going to make a decision the first time.
Yeah.
The cost, and you're talking 10, 15, 20, sometimes the cost of that is more than the cost.
Oh, yeah.
But we're putting the cost on the backs of the taxpayers too. That's part of my concern is we keep going back to them for people that aren't being responsible, aren't stepping up. We keep going back and back and charging them more and more.
But if these
Like, just like
municipalities
congestion is a very localized problem. To my way of thinking, the municipalities have a vested interest in doing this rather than what appears to be passing a buck to the county. It's not the first time.
Sure, I do need to correct you on that, okay? This buck was passed to us by the General Assembly. They did not give the municipalities the authority to implement a fee, all right? They gave the counties.
That's not what's being discussed.
I'm just saying in terms of
the point is the municipalities have other tools available to them, and they have obligations that they refuse to exercise.
One at a time, gentlemen. Gary.
The municipalities have tools available to them that they have decided not to exercise.
I don't agree with that, and I would like to bring in some of our zoning and code enforcement officers from around this county and let them respond to the fact that they're not enforcing the ordinances of their municipalities, okay? I'd like to hear what they have to say about that, because that's not true.
Well,
In fact, I hear we got too many regulations, right? That's what we hear all the time. But God forbid they actually are doing their jobs, and then now they get criticized for that. But they don't do enough enforcement. I'm going to take that message back to my municipality and find out what little enforcement they're doing.
Well, that's a total non sequitur. The well, the point being made here is you have a very localized problem. This is why municipalities exist, and they're very protective of their authority in these matters, but of course, with that authority comes responsibility. And it seems that the easy way out is for them simply to ask the county to tax everybody else to take care of a local problem. And that sure appears to be what's happening here. If we spread it all out across a bigger audience, then there's no blame to be assigned at the municipal level, where frankly they may have a responsibility, financial and otherwise, to step up and address these issues. So the easy way out is to stick a bunch of people with a new fit.
Gary, from a broad policy level, do you see a role for the county in this?
Potential.
Financially?
Potential. That's the point I'm trying to make, is I just think the case has not been made for this to become the singular or predominant tool in addressing blight. We are leaving a lot of good options on the table because other people don't want to take responsibility, or there are too many things impinging on them to take a bigger role, including assuming some of the risk, which, I would prefer to see the private sector lead on this issue, but at the same time, given the option of offloading risk, they're going to offload as much risk on others as they can, especially the public sector. So there needs to be a responsibility on their part as well, and there needs to be a willingness to allow them to exercise the tools they do have.
As I said earlier, I think this program for passed in the Blighted Properties Reinvestment Board has always been a program of last resort. When the municipality brings a program or a property forward, they have to demonstrate to us in excruciating detail what they've done from a codes enforcement standpoint. So I don't see municipalities punting these properties to us and saying, hey, take care of it. In fact, there were several in Silver Spring Township when I was still with the board.
So what is their match? What is their skin in the game?
Well, I think, yeah, exactly. I think their skin in the game was that they've gone to their end of their ability to try and enforce on the code, and now they're looking for someone else to help come in and take the property. When the property's taken, then it's okay, who's going to pay for the improvement? The municipality now, as we did in our survey, a lot of them said we don't have any financial resources for that. So they are looking to us to help. As part of the program, then I think we need to look back and see and communicate the message back. If the board wants to do something like this, municipalities, there absolutely has to be a match from your end, financial, to make this happen, so that we are spreading and not looking simply to the rest of the taxpayers to pay for this. That they do assume
we want to see some concrete evidence of that. I think we've already discussed the possibility of lien forgiveness as something they could certainly do. I mean, if they want to get these things back on the tax rolls and eliminate the potential loss of property value, assessed value within their community, then they absolutely should be taking a role in this.
I agree.
Probably lien forgiveness probably represents a small portion of what they'll make back.
I agree, but I think that just so everyone's clear on the point, I think the properties that we're talking about, especially the municipalities that have submitted properties, I believe that those municipalities have a strong track record of codes enforcement and likely have done all that they can on these properties, and that's why they're appealing to the county.
Absolutely. And I want to ask a question. The Blighted Property Reinvestment Board, what has it been able to do with the resources it currently has? Or what resources doesn't have?
So, right now, the only resource that they've been able to take advantage of is the CPG program. And so, once the board certifies a property is blighted to the redevelopment authority, the municipal, and the county planning commission certified blighted, it comes to us. And in the packet, I gave you a 2 to 3 page summary of the whole process of that. So once it's turned over to us, we can choose to do nothing. Acquire it via eminent domain. The newest tool, as I alluded to, is the conservatorship. But all of those things cost money, and in the past, the only resource available for that has been the CPG program. And so, since I've been here in the last 5 years, we've been able to do 3 properties.
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years, only because there has been sufficient CDBG funds, and I use sufficient lightly to take care of that.
How often does the board meet?
It meets, if there's action, every other month, the second Thursday of every other month.
But would you say that because there really are no resources available, that essentially almost makes moot the, whatever the blighted property reinvestment board could do?
Right, we see very few referrals, and the reason is because there aren't resources to deal with it at the end.
So you only have a handful of projects, but you're saying the only reason you only have a handful of projects is because nobody thinks you can fix it anyhow. So they're not going to send you their blight problems.
And we've seen that too with the property owners, when the planning department was heavily involved in it. Their property owners, we would send letters. I can recall one in Industrial Park in Hampton Township. We'd send letter after letter to the property owner, they ignore them. But the property itself has immense value.
Right.
But they just ignore it, and if then the municipality doesn't want us to move on to condemnation because they don't have any end game, it's all for nothing. And that's where you look at the list from the blighted properties reinvestment, where I know we had properties that were submitted, but we had maybe one or two. There was one in Silver Spring, I remember, that we got the property fixed up with some discussion with the property, but most of them, we get to the end and they sit there. They've been determined blighted, but there's no money to move it forward.
And I hate to keep going back to the same example, but 203 Main Street's an example of that. There's a property in Lemoyne, 214 Herman Avenue, that sat for a while until we could petition the court for conservatorship. And that's an instance where we didn't use CDBG. The redevelopment authority funded money for that. We're using our own reserves to demolish and put a lien on it and hope that we recover those costs in the sale.
We're out of time here, Tammy. You got a couple things you want to bring up?
Yes.
Okay.
And
The floor is yours.
I do, thank you. I do applaud the effort of the Housing Authority for all of this work, and I look forward to looking through that. I think that's a great start. But I will echo what Gary said too. I think there's more discussion that needs to happen, and I thank the commissioners for continuing the discussion. I don't think, just from what I'm hearing today, that there's any decision that could really be made right now. I think we still have a lot of dots to connect, and I think this is a good group of people, and we're heading in the right direction. I think there's a lot of good stuff that can happen. It's kind of just 2 points. I've never been a big fan of Act 152 from the start because I don't think it does enough. And I think, if anything, it puts a lot of limitations on things, the limitations on the dollars. I think it was a great way to compromise with a bunch of legislators. We're going to give you what you want, but it's not quite accomplishing what it needs to accomplish to tackle blight. Okay, so that's been my issue with it. And seeing in my office, seeing the fees that we collect and how much of that fee actually stays here within the county drives me insane. And as of 4 p.m. on November 30th, our fees will be going up $4.75 to supplement the judicial computer system once again. Where half of my fees go to the computer judicial system, and I'm not even a corporate office. So that does drive me nuts. So I give you guys credit too for coming up with this idea, hey, let's put it in the pot of money, let's let it grow so it's self-sustaining. I have a few little concerns with that logistical, if we can do that. But it does have to be just demolition. It can't be administrative costs, anything like that. So who's going to be paying those administrative costs? The county will be paying those administrative costs because it has not yet at that point trickled down to the municipalities. Okay, so there are some things. The other point, that's my whole little soapbox on the whole process. But last month, the legislature, we got a report from the House Resolution 1073 of 2016, which called on the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee to conduct a review of the fees of the county recorders of deeds. Okay, and they came out with a recommendation, which of course doesn't mean anything, it's not law, but I have been assured that we are going to have legislation proposed early in 2018 about the fee structure for the recorder of deeds. Not that I'm opposed to a lot of it, okay? They're trying to make our fees more predictable, and yet they raise our fees $4.75. So that's how clean things are. We've got these weird odd numbers floating around. But anyway, so we don't know what's coming. So the thing I would ask for the commissioners is, don't do anything just yet. Please, if you just wait a few months, let's get our act together. Let's get some more of the information too, especially on the contractor side of things, the developers. I think that's fantastic. You find out right from the horse's mouth, you know, what would make you develop this project. I think that's huge. That could really help us as we move forward to see where we need to fill in the gaps. But anyway, back to the fee schedule. There's nothing, I don't know what they're going to propose, but basically what they're talking about doing is increasing the base fee, which makes sense in a lot of ways because the base fee hasn't been increased since I think the 70s or early 80s or something like that. So in a lot of ways it is time. But through this process, what it could also do is eliminate the UPI fee. And that could create another little issue. I don't know how much it would affect the county. I haven't crunched those numbers. It could decrease some of our revenue, but also increasing the base fee could give the commissioners the opportunity to have unrestricted dollars and say, hey, let's take $15 of this increase and let's put it towards blight and let's address blight and let's not, you know, just focus on the demolition because the demolition is such a small part of it. So I think there may be some options with what's coming up with the recorder's fees, but they range, because there's a lot of counties that don't do any of the, we call them May bills, the affordable housing, the UPI, even the blight properties, those extra fees that are added in. And they said with their proposal here, counties could charge as low as $61 per deed, and right now we're at $79 right now, but they could charge up to as much as $130. Which to me is a huge increase, and I will blame everybody except myself for that increase if that happens, by the way. But there might be an opportunity with that increase to put some dollars towards this project. So I think, and it could also do away with the UPI completely. It could do away with affordable housing. It could do away with the blended property. Not saying it will, but you never know until you have it in front of you to see in front of you what's going to happen. So I think until we know what we're looking at with that proposal, if I could ask you to kind of still proceed, get our ducks in a row, do some more asking and do some more information gathering. Once we know what's going to happen with my fees, we may know, hey, let's do it, let's not do it. But that's all that I have, and that's all I can to this.
We have such a good read on what the General Assembly is going to do now.
We were supposed to get a $2 fee increase, and it was $4.75. I'm still figuring out the 75 cents. That really has me perplexed.
We do know that they passed Act 152, and it was overwhelmingly approved in the Senate and the House. So, in any event, I think that's what's before us, and whether or not we want to consider it or not. In terms of the developers, what would make them develop a property? Well, I think certainly if they didn't have the cost of demolition, that would probably be an enticement for them to the private sector to actually, develop these
But
properties.
if they're going to benefit from it, Jim, too, why should we pay for the demolition if they're?
That may be the obstacle as to why it's not being redeveloped in terms of what the demolition cost is. So, it's up to my colleagues here as to whether we want to move forward with this or not. I personally am supportive of it. I think that, in terms of some of the arguments that have been made, I don't agree with them. I think that, many of our municipalities have very professional zoning and code enforcement operations and are doing the best they can. I think when we look at smaller municipalities like Mount Holly Springs, for example, I'm not sure where they find the money if there's a blighted property, within their municipality, unless they're going to increase or implement a municipal real estate tax. I'm not quite sure what Mount Holly's real estate tax is. That ultimately, if we don't come up with a solution here, we're either going to have blighted properties in certain locales, or they're going to, I guess we're saying we're in favor of them increasing real estate taxes. So, I think I like the suggestion of a pilot 3-year period, and I'd be willing to support that, but it's really up to.
A lot of us believe the pilot program is just a time release version of passage, full scale passage. So
Well, we
I'd
could-
rather see us exhaust all our information needs.
We can make an ordinance so that it expires in 3 years. I mean, you know,
It's just a little too easy to just say, well, it's already in place, so let's just keep it going. So I'd rather not put it in place and burden some people unnecessarily. So my thought on this is, we really have two separate issues here. The first issue is, does the county see that it should accept primary responsibility for this issue before we've discussed what role others may want to take? That's one question. And we have a lot of questions we can ask and have answered before we come to a determination on that. But the second one is, how do you want to fund it? Even if we do accept that the county wants to accept this responsibility, the question of the fee is entirely separate question as to whether that's the appropriate or even the best means of doing this. It clearly has cachet because it's the most politically acceptable, because the burden is pawned off on a handful of people to pay who really have just no choice in the matter, and they're so highly targeted that their numbers aren't significant enough to have a true political impact. So is that the route you want to go because it's easier? Or is the truly fair thing to do is simply say, okay, you've identified a target dollar amount that you need for a revolving program, revolving funding program, and the county accepts responsibility for this, therefore we will put general fund money into a revolving program, and if we need to adjust millage for that, then everybody will bear the cost of this, despite the fact that, as I said, blight tends to be a highly localized issue. So now there's lots of highly localized issues that are paid for by spreading the burden out. That's the entire premise of state government, quite frankly, and federal government for that matter. So it's a legitimate question, and but I think it's one that we have an obligation to ask. There's the question of our role is issue number one, and the question of how we pay for that role is question number two. And I think they should be addressed separately.
Well, I mean, yeah, my only comment on that is the legislature made it our role to consider this. We didn't make it that way. The legislature did by giving us this option.
They didn't make it our role. They basically allowed us to insert ourselves as a primary responsible party.
They gave us the option, yes. And they did not give municipalities the option. Yeah, they gave the counties the option. So, you know, again, I'd be willing to proceed on a pilot basis and, you know, to have an expiration date, you know, after 3 years, and whereby, you know, the next board that would consider this would have to proactively implement it again if it were to continue. But I think this is a tool. I think that the Blighted Property Reinvestment Board, you know, could come up with some more stringent rules, you know, along the lines of maybe, you know, for certain properties that meet certain criteria, that, you know, require that the municipality provide for forgiveness of the liens or at least a portion of it. But I think it, you know, in the interest again of, you know, our county's continued viability, and again, we're much better shape than some other counties in terms of blight. We don't have it. It's not all over the place, that's for sure. But we do have, and I think we have some cases of it, and we should snuff it out before it's allowed to spread. And if I have no problem working in partnership with our municipalities on it, and, you know, maybe expecting the municipalities to, you know, to try to, you know, assist in whatever way, shape, or form, because I mean, we're all in this together. We really are. So.
Is this something you want to talk about in an MAB meeting? Because we can bring our municipalities in, we can bring some of the private sector folks in and have a good discussion with everybody in the room and talk about something else.
That you just captured one of my notes. Are there any other comments anybody would like to make?
I just want to mention one thing. I think that's a very valuable opportunity. It certainly would not be the definitive one. I think the municipalities will be fairly predictable in saying, yeah, county, we want you to take a lead role.
Well, we do have how many?
They can certainly bring some good perspectives to it, and I'd love to hear their feedback on their willingness to accept, you know, what type of role they are willing to accept. But I do think we should also make some type of outreach to the development community and ask them about what obstacles they see that prevent blight remediation, what are non-market forces that are in there.
Anybody else?
Just real quick on that one.
And I want to make a comment.
There were a number of municipalities that, called on us to seriously consider this. And we have those resolutions, and this was done, I guess, last summer sometime, or it's been a while since we talked about this.
I think it was this year.
It would be good. I don't have a problem with, this, an item of discussion at the municipal advisory board. And maybe we could bring in some of our codes enforcement officers to tell the story that they're facing. And in addition to that, get some input from some developers as to whether or not they think, essentially the demolition of blighted property would be an incentive to them to actually move in and develop, some of these areas. So.
I think that there's, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say too, while we're having this great discussion, as I mentioned before too, I don't feel it's something we have to decide today. It's not today or never. But I would really like to see us all engaging, and I think that's a wonderful idea, Cook, and before making a decision to institute. That's all.
Yeah, I think none of us were going to make a decision today. I know I'm not. But I will say that I think Act 152 does have some merit to it. I personally have a lot of questions I want to ask our solicitor, and I'll share those with you guys about this. And for one thing, I think getting some information from developers as to exactly why you wouldn't want to look at this property, Jonathan. I think you answered that somewhat well, your perspective. I think that's pretty accurate. But again, I think this piece of legislation does have some merit. I mean, I have some concerns maybe on the legal side. So I think we'll continue our discussions. And I wouldn't want to just push this out forever. I think we should maybe try to make some type of decision within the next quarter or two. And if that decision is to do nothing, that's what it is. But I think we need to capture a little bit more data.
Jonathan, can I put you on the spot? I'm just curious as to.
Wait for the answer.
Yeah.
As the head of our economic development, effort here in Cumberland County, do you have thoughts for or against this?
I think it could be a really good tool. My thoughts are twofold. It's always financial and it's always regulatory. When we look at sites from a developer's viewpoint, the viewpoint is how can we offset negative costs? And what is the municipal barrier to get the project through? So, whatever that may mean and may be. And so we see that there's a lot of municipalities that do not have the staff, do not have the capacity. Some do. East Pennsboro is one who does. But then you can go to other communities where they do not. And the communities that don't have those resources, a lot of times it leads to, you could have this demo tax there, but if there still isn't the path to get through entitlements to do whatever, whether it's residential, commercial, doesn't matter, then you still have that same issue. So I would envision that most developers are going to tell you that, is that there's a financial piece and there's also a regulatory piece. And I think our job should be to figure out how can we first tackle the regulatory piece, and as a last result, use this pot of money potentially to offset any negative equity that may be a result of the project. So that's a long answer to say that yes, I do support it. I think it has a lot of merit, but I think it seems like the census is there still needs to be some fact finding to get to a position where we feel a little bit more comfortable.
John, I have a question that I really don't know the answer to this, but in your opinion, does the existence of the pool of money in any way create in itself more demand for that pool of money?
Demand from
will the pool of money simply result in a plus up in the requests for money?
Yeah, but I think if done properly, it would be done so in a way that's an incentive, not as just, here's a pool of money that I can now tap into. And that's where I think, there's other avenues that should be pursued before you get to this money
I'll be curious to find out what if done properly means when we develop this idea further, so
Yeah.
that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, in Shippensburg, we've been working in Shippensburg, and one of their issues is how do we redevelop our downtown? And when you look at their codes and their reinforcement, and you look at, some of their properties that probably not zoned properly, a lot of the issues are right in there alone. And so I do think that some of it can be handled just by, changing some of that up without even needing this pot of money. But I do think that there's going to be projects out there that this money is going to be needed to correct the problem. And so I don't know that when I'm saying done properly, I don't really have a crystal ball for that, but I do think that there's merit to this request.
And quick question for Kate, the size of this pot of money that we're talking about, could you refresh my memory what we're talking about, how much we expect to generate?
If we had collected the average over the last 4 years was about $250,000 a year, Tammy, I think what you had originally provided.
Yeah, on average, we've been collecting, I took the affordable housing numbers because that's the same folks that would be hit with this fee as well. I took the 2008 to 2016 average, and I did an average just from 2013 to 16, the more current one. And the last 4 years, the average is $248,000.
That's on $15. That would be $15.
That is a $15.
Yeah, okay.
That's, yeah. And really, to be honest with you, you're gonna collect less, it's a waste of money. If you're gonna do it, you gotta
I
charge
guess
it.
real quick follow-up question though is, again, separating the issue of whether the need is there versus how we get the money. If the money were to, let's say there was a grant given to you to establish this revolving loan basis type fund, how much would you see yourself needing?
$500,000.
How much?
I would say $500,000 as a figure.
Okay, to address.
Because it would regenerate.
Yeah. So my question was I'm trying to link up the resource base with the true need. We're saying the need is essentially underestimated because nobody's forwarding property to us because they know we don't have money. So if suddenly there was money, if that was not a consideration, if money was available, how big would our list be? How much money would be needed to address that?
And to answer your question, I think yes. I think the availability of that money, we would see an increased demand because.
Well, legitimate.
Okay. Because, I mean, we've talked how many times about, we don't see properties come through the blight board because there's no resource. But knowing there's that resource is going to incentivize those municipalities to bring those properties forward.
That's helpful.
And I think we would certainly, develop considerations, develop priorities for which projects would get the funding over others.
I think that does help.
And then potentially, a two-year pilot. Correct. Okay. Any other business to come in front of the board? If not, I want to thank you all for the great information you provided to us. It's really been helpful. And we'll continue our research. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So,
Adjourn. Thank you.